So thanks for finding this. This is actually it's a perfect story for today's lecture. What happened was that Google, because they operate a web browser, they detected that hackers were exploiting a vulnerability in Chrome to do some bad stuff. And not just that, but they were taking advantage of this vulnerability in connection to a Windows vulnerability. And with those two vulnerabilities together, they could remotely access a Windows computer and gain access to it, do bad things. So what this is, as Davis mentioned, is a 0 day. That means that there is no patch available. So Tuesday was Patch Tuesday, and every Tuesday of the month, one Tuesday out of the month, Microsoft will release a patch for all of their products. And in those updates will be security updates. Well, that's day 1 of the patch, and now we're on like day 2. And the thing is that once a patch is released, then it's like a race between who can patch their machines the soonest before a hacker will take advantage of that exploit. For example, on Monday we talked about Equifax, how on March 8th, 2017, an exploit was published. A vulnerability was described as well as proof of concept code. And 2 days later, hackers had broken into Equifax to verify that their systems were vulnerable. So that's an example. That was 2 days after a patch was released. But in this case, a 0 day, there is no patch. There's nothing that companies can do to prevent someone from taking advantage of a weakness in Chrome and in Windows, other than trying to prevent all traffic to that software. So this is a really bad thing. And Google has a policy that when they find a vulnerability in someone else's product, like in this case Microsoft's product, they give that company, what is it, 2 weeks or 8 days? Let's see. When we discovered the vulnerability, we reported it to Microsoft. Where is it? Oh yeah, wait. It's like 10 days later or 2 weeks later. I don't see it here. I think they say it in the article, but I don't see it here. Anyways, they said, Microsoft, you have a 0 day exploit in Windows. So you have 10 days to patch this, and then we're going public. So this is what they did. They said, today we're going public. There's already a patch for Chrome. So if you use Chrome, you haven't updated it in the last week, then update it, because otherwise your browser is susceptible to these attacks. And then they, as of this day, and I don't know if Microsoft has patched this yet. I should find this out. But they reported this before Microsoft even patched their systems. And so that's kind of, some people would argue that's not ethical, that they should have waited for Microsoft to patch their systems. But from Google's point of view, this exploit is being taken advantage of right now. There's already harm being done right now. And so they want to tell people as soon as possible, and frankly put pressure on Microsoft to create a patch. So that's what they did. They published this, and as of this day, Microsoft still had not sent out a patch. I hope this past Tuesday they fixed this, but I don't know for sure. So this is an example of a 0 day. So let me tell you more about what this is, because this really goes to what today's topic is about, which is exploitation, which means exploiting a software vulnerability. So if you were to make like a range of different kinds of bugs, on your left-hand side with bugs, that would be all possible bugs. And there's lots of bugs, because if you've done any programming, you know that software is complex. And software that's complex is hard to manage. It's easy to have mistakes. And really complex code, complexity is the enemy of security. So the more complex your software is, the more security holes you'll have. But anyways, not all bugs will be vulnerabilities that actually represent a security threat. And a smaller subset are proof of concepts, where you can actually develop code that works, where you can demonstrate, look, I can run this software, and it will compromise this server. It will break into the user's machine. And then there's an even smaller subset still, which is a weaponized exploit. So this isn't just like proof of concept code. This is something that's reliable, that works. It works really well. And because it works so well, it's valuable and you can sell it. In fact, that's what 0 days are. So yes, they are exploits for which there is no patch, but they are also highly marketable quantities. Now the first example, public example I know of a 0 day going for sale was back in 2005. Back then, there was no open market for 0 days. And someone posted to eBay saying, I have this exploit for Microsoft Excel, and I'm going to sell this exploit to the highest bidder. So they're not selling this to Microsoft. They're selling this to ostensibly other hackers or governments who want to use this vulnerability against people for whatever reason. And eBay caught wind of this, and they said, wait a minute, this auction violates our terms of service, and they pulled the auction. But this is the first publicized example. But today, the sale of 0 days is like way out in the open. And there are really large companies doing it. There are really small, like boutiques, like just a few people like working on this. This is some guy on the island of the country of Malta. And he's working, it's kind of like a dramatically lit photo, but he's just a researcher looking for security vulnerabilities. And he might find one or two in a whole year. And he might sell those, each one for $40,000, $100,000, $200,000. And the sale of one 0 day might make his entire year. But then there are companies like Zerodium. And Zerodium is, well, they're one of the biggest players, one of the loudest players in this space, and some people would think they're the most scrupulous, they are not ashamed of what they're doing. And that is, they are buying 0 days and they're selling them to governments around the world and corporations with money to buy them. So what does this look like? So this was just recently updated just a couple months ago. This is for 0 day payouts for desktop servers. So just some of these acronyms here so you can read this better. And I'm sorry, the type is kind of small. Maybe you can't see that in the back. Let me try to make this bigger. Let me show you an example of this. Zoomed in. Okay, 4 researchers, eligible 0 days and payouts. Okay, here we go. All right, so it says remote code execution. This means that you don't have to be at that computer to run this code. You can connect remotely over the internet and break in. So these are the most valuable kinds of exploits because they don't require any user interaction. You don't have to trick a user to click on something. You just take it over. So those are really powerful, where you can remotely connect to a computer. Local privilege escalation, that means you break in as like a lower privileged user, and then you become an administrator or you root user through this exploit. Sandbox escape, that's like in modern web browsers, they kind of try to put up walls around what that browser can do, so that if the browser is compromised, it can't take over the rest of your computer. And if you can escape those walls or that sandbox, then that's really valuable because then you can go on to the rest of the computer. But I want you to pay attention to these payouts. So for Windows, for a remote code exploit, 0 click, that means the user doesn't have to click on any link. You don't have to phish the user. They're paying up to $1 million for one of those. And this Apache web server, this is Chrome, the Chrome browser. That's what that means. Or actually, maybe that doesn't mean that. Maybe that's the Chrome. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure if that means either the Chrome OS or the Chrome browser. And I think it means the Chrome browser. Yeah, because this is running on Windows. So that is what it is. This is So this is kind of interesting. So look at this. So Zerodium will pay up to $500,000, $500,000 for a Google Chrome browser exploit. And for Safari, they'll pay up to $100,000. What does that tell you? Yeah, Karan? It could be. It could be that more people use Chrome than Safari. On the desktop, that's the case. And mobile, I think Safari is probably the bigger browser on mobile. It's debatable. But that is definitely a factor. So what is the popularity of the software? Anything else you can think of? Why the prices could be different? Grant?
I think that would mean Chrome would probably be more secure.
Yeah. And Chrome, just from my experience, having worked with the Chrome team, they are some of the best. Like, security is such a high priority for them, and they do research studies all the time to improve the security of Chrome. So it's not at all surprising that Chrome has such a higher price than for Safari. So Edge, same thing. Firefox. So Chrome is it's not an order of magnitude, but it's 5 times its higher payout than for all the other browsers. So that tells you something about the security of this software, which is kind of cool, huh? Let's see, what else? So any antivirus up to 50,000. Antivirus software is not very secure software. So that's, it's kind of ironic, but it's not surprising they're kind of at the bottom of the list here. And then for, like, I don't know, like MyBB or Drupal, or I don't know if WordPress is even on here, because WordPress, oh, it's up here. So they'll pay up to $100,000 for a remote code exploit on WordPress. All right, so moving on. This is their mobile payout. So if you have a remote jailbreak for iPhone, they'll pay up to $2 million for that. Sorry, I don't mean to scroll around. It won't center for some reason. Come here. Hang on, let me try to get this centered again. There we go. Okay. And again, 0-click. If you can jailbreak a phone, but it takes user interaction, then up to $1.5 million. So this is kind of interesting. So overall, the payouts are higher for mobile than they are for desktop. And I think one of the reasons is because desktop OSs are, on the whole, more secure than desktop OSs. And here again, iOS is at the very top of the list. Android is, where is Android? Well, it's right here. So these gray ones, this is for Android. Here, 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 and here. So yeah, so they'll pay up to $500,000 for a Chrome exploit. So again, this tells you some of the relative strength of some of these packages, some of these tools. And then these are messaging apps. So for the first time, messaging apps have really risen up this ranking in terms of the payouts. So Signal, which you're all familiar with now, is pretty high. The payouts for a Signal exploit is really high, and even more for WhatsApp. And I think to the point about popularity, WhatsApp is hugely popular. Even though it has a very similar code base to Signal, the user base is orders of magnitude greater. So questions about this whole market? So it's kind of interesting. So if you look at the reason why this space is so controversial is because these are all vulnerabilities, and there's so many users of these products, right? We all use one or more of these products on these lists. And researchers who find these things, they deliberately do not disclose them to the vendors, which would make all of us more secure, right? If they found an iOS bug and they reported it to Apple, Apple would fix it, and the world's iOS users would be better off, would be more secure because of that. And they're deliberately not doing that. Instead, they're selling it to basically the highest bidder so that those people can hack the people they want to. So you might think, well, what kinds of people? Governments want to breach other governments. Governments want to breach the systems of their some of their citizens. So in some countries where freedom of speech is highly constricted, police states, we have documented instances, many instances where governments will just break into political dissidents' computers and find out what kinds of activities they've been doing. And law enforcement uses these. So you remember the San Bernardino, the terrorist attack, and how the FBI wanted to compromise an iPhone. In the end, they bought a 0-day. That's how they got into the phone. So law enforcement also is on the market for these types of things. So it's kind of it's a really interesting new world because of this kind of market. And companies, for their part, they're paying bug bounties. They pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for these same bugs, but none of them come close to the amount of money that you could get by selling it on the gray market, something like this. Questions about 0 days, the 0-day market, how this works? Like, to give you an idea of the prevalence of this, I mean, now like in DC, you'll see, like in the subway, ads like this. Raytheon, a major government contractor, saying we are one of the leaders in 0-day discoveries. Like, that's how like mainstream it is now. But this is definitely a debate that we as a societies around the world need to have. Some people think that the US government should they should be the highest bidder for all 0 days and release them immediately to the vendors and then make those users safer. That's actually a pretty cogent argument from a lot of perspectives. But the US government, they also want to have a capability to defend themselves in cyberspace. And for that reason, the US government has actually a document that says, for the majority of vulnerabilities we find, we will release it back to the manufacturer like Microsoft. But we will reserve certain 0 days for ourselves, for our defense capabilities or offense capabilities. And we have documents from the Trump administration and the Obama administration where they publicly disclose this policy. It's kind of vague, but they've straight up said this is what we do. We do not release all of the vulnerabilities we find. Okay, so now to this class. Now the reason why you care about this stuff is because this is how hacking works. When we talk about gaining unauthorized access, that usually happens via guessing passwords, and you're all probably sick of that now that you've gone through the last lab. But this is the other avenue. And one of the major tools to do this is called Metasploit. And this is the tool you'll use for the exploitation lab, and this is the tool you'll want to use for the midterm. And I'm going to show you a walkthrough about this software product, this particular tool, and why it's so powerful. So what's really cool about Metasploit is that before Metasploit was released in, when was that? Like 2010 or something like that? I have to look back in my notes to see when the Metasploit came out. But it used to be that if you found an exploit, like you would code up a proof of concept just from scratch. And then you'd have a software tool to exploit that one thing. And the next exploit you found, you'd have to start from scratch again and develop another software tool to exploit that one vulnerability. But Metasploit changed this because it's a framework. It's basically a giant library of exploits. For example, on the topic of the government holding back 0 days, there was one exploit, which I've already mentioned in this class. It's called Eternal Blue. And this is on Twitter. Just like a month or so prior to this, the NSA's, the National Security Agency's 0 days was breached, and it was released onto the internet by a group called the Shadow Brokers. And we don't know who this group is. Some people speculate that it was Russia, just for political reasons, but we don't know for sure. But what we do know is that these tools came from the NSA. The NSA knew about these highly these really powerful exploits for Microsoft Windows, and they did not tell Microsoft. And this tool got out of their hand, and now it's on the internet. And so now it's not a 0-day anymore. Microsoft has patched this, but just a month later, and sometimes it's days later, it got rolled into the Metasploit library, which means that students, hackers around the world can use Metasploit to use like these super powerful tools that a couple months earlier was the provenance of the NSA. Does that make sense? So it's amazing how powerful these tools are and how quickly they get incorporated into Metasploit. So it has a library of, well, I don't know, several thousand exploits in Metasploit. And you can also pay for exploits that have been patched but are still really useful because companies are really slow to patch their products. So you could buy, like this page right here, for Office, you could buy an exploit for $1,000, and it should have been patched, but many people haven't patched their systems. So it could be very well be that you could compromise the system using one of these really cheap exploits. And some of them are like $20, $30. So there's this whole secondary market for those vulnerabilities that are no longer 0 days, but they're still pretty useful. Okay, so let me just show you a demo of how this works. So I'm going to start off with Kali Linux, and let me make this a little bit darker. I'm sorry, it's going to make it even tougher to stay awake, but you can see the screen better. So this is the tool Nessus, which I mentioned. This is a vulnerability scanner. It doesn't just tell you what ports are open, but for a given host, it will tell you which vulnerabilities are the most serious. So here's a host, which is Microsoft Windows, Windows 10. And it is running some software. And if I click on this, it gives me a report saying this vulnerability right here, Icecast, is kind of serious. And I can drill into this, and it'll tell me why that's important. And it'll tell me the severity. In this case, it's a medium severity. In this case, to be honest, Nessus doesn't really understand how serious this bug is because it's actually really, really serious. But it's kind of lumped it in with some other not so serious exploits for this software called Icecast. And if I scroll down on the right-hand side towards the bottom, it says exploit available, true. That means you could go to Metasploit or some other exploit framework and find an exploit for that very thing. And then and it says like since when has this exploit been available? So this is just kind of to tip us off that this is a vulnerability that we probably want to check out using Metasploit. So now let's do that. Make this bigger. Okay, so to access Metasploit, you type in Metasploit Framework Console. Okay, and you can't really appreciate the ASCII art. So every time you open it up, it has some new and different splash page. In this case, it says Metasploit. Some are actually kind of fun. So it says there are 1,749 exploits, and there are these auxiliary modules, and there are these post modules, and these payloads, and these encoders. Anyways, these are lots of different, basically, tools that hackers can use to break into different things. So what an exploit is, this is software that takes advantage of a vulnerability. It is like yeah, it's one thing to identify a vulnerability, but an exploit will actually take advantage of it. It'll give you access via that vulnerability. A payload is something different. It's kind of like the analogy of a missile, and you know, from a missile, there's the rocket itself, right, with the jets, and you use this whole infrastructure to launch the missile into space, but the missile's not really what you care about. What you care about is the payload of the missile. And in this case, the payload of this particular missile is the satellite. That's the payload. So the whole missile's job is to get this to some destination and deliver the payload. And in the case of Metasploit, that's what these exploits do. The exploits are the rocket, and the payload is the actual software that you're going to use to take over that computer. The payload is the malware. And another way of looking at this is that Metasploit is a library of malware. And it has malware to connect to a machine, and it also has malware, which is the payload, to do something nasty to that target machine, whether it's to give you access or to wipe the machine or to bring it offline. That's what a payload does. Auxiliary modules, they are just supporting tools, like they're scanner tools. You can use Metasploit to scan. You can use it to harvest passwords. You can do a lot of things, and I'll show you some examples. And post modules are tools, once you actually break into a system, they help you post exploitation to gather even more information or get even further access, maybe to penetrate the rest of the network. All right, so let me show you some examples. So Metasploit is all written in Ruby, and if you know any Ruby, you can just drop right into the Ruby interpreter and just type commands like so I just did hello world in Metasploit in Ruby, because Metasploit is just a bunch of Ruby scripts, well, in a really nice framework. And I could say framework version, and this will tell me the version of Metasploit here. Okay. So now I'm back in the Metasploit terminal, which is this MSF thing. So what I'm going to do is I have Metasploit open, and I also have Windows 10. And this is a fully up-to-date Windows 10. And I'm going to do something really, this probably hurts some Microsoft administrators to see, but I'm going to run this tool called Icecast. And I'm going to run it as an administrator, and it's a server. So Icecast is a media streaming server. Hang on a second. Let's see, why did it do that? Hang on. So I'm turning this off for this demo because we're starting simple. So there's ways of getting around Windows Defender, but I'm trying to make this even easier for this lab. Okay, so I've turned on this server, and this is like a music streaming server. I can put movies in here. Actually, I don't think so. I think I just put music in here, and you can connect to the server and stream music, just like you could from like Spotify or something. But this is open source, and you can run it from any computer. But this particular one, this piece of software is also, it's vulnerable. It's since been patched, but I put all of this on your VMs so that you can play around with Metasploit to make the learning of Metasploit easy and fun. So first of all, I'm going to scan that Windows computer using Nmap. And that's what the problem is. So I need to I think the Windows firewall is on. So Okay, let's try this again. Okay, this was working right before class. So let me just make sure the networking's correct. I'll show you this lab. 6A 1.180. Oh, I'm using the wrong IP address. Duh. There we go. Okay, so I'm pinging from inside Metasploit, and I guess this is kind of interesting. You can still run Linux commands from inside Metasploit. And so let me show you another command, which is nmap. So running nmap, and it shows me that there are these ports open. And one of these is port 8000. And if I run to check what services are running, it'll tell me that 8000 is running Icecast. And I showed you that Nessus report that said that Icecast has this vulnerability, which you should check out. It's right there, Icecast streaming server. And let me just scoot this over just a little bit. Okay. All right, so how do we find stuff in Metasploit? So we can do a number of things. One is we can just type the word search and use a parameter like name and type something like, well, the name of the exploit. In this case, it says, yes, we have an exploit against this. It's right here called exploit Windows HTTP Icecast header. So let's go there. So using the keyword use, I'm going to say I'm going to use this exploit under the Windows branch. It's actually under the exploit branch under Windows, HTTP, Icecast, and here I am. And if I type the info keyword, it'll tell me about this exploit. So it says, so first of all, it gives me a rank. So this is a really great exploit because it works reliably and it gives you a good amount of access. It gives you basically the access of that user, and because this is running as an administrator, when I take it over, I can become the administrator, which is pretty cool. And then it has different options. So it has a remote host, that's an IP address, and that's my target. So I'm going to set this to the IP address that I'm trying to attack. That's 192. Sorry, our host. Now if I type show options, it'll show me that this variable has been set, the our host variable. So I've got this. Now I need a payload. And now, well, actually, maybe before I continue, let me just show you this. Just FYI, this is the exploit that was used to take over Equifax, the one I showed you. So here it is. You can read about it. Again, this was posted the day, that Apache Struts came out and said all these systems are vulnerable. This was released into Metasploit. So this is like incredibly powerful, and it was available day one. But we're not going to use that. We're going to use the one we have for Icecast. So now we need a list of payloads, and there's actually a lot of payloads. You saw from the beginning there's over 350 payloads in Metasploit. And in this case, we're going to use, well, if I type show payloads, it'll show us all of the payloads that are applicable for this exploit. and there's actually a lot. So there's a lot of different payloads we could deliver to this system. But the payload we're going to use is actually one of the most useful, and it's called Meterpreter. I'll show you what that is. I'm going to use Meterpreter, but with a reverse TCP connection, which means I'm going to use my software vulnerability, my exploit on that remote system, and the payload is actually going to dial back and connect to my computer. So my laptop right here is going to connect back to me. So here we go. So I've selected that payload, and now if I type show options again, now I can see the options that I have for the payload. And it says I need to set an IP address for the local host, the local computer, and that's my laptop. So my IP address is this right here. So I'll set what was that? 9686. Okay. So now I have the IP address for the local host. I've got the IP address of my remote host, my target. I have the port of the target, which I'm just going to leave as the default. And so IceCast could be on a different port, but it's set to serve music from port 8000. And Nmap tells me that that port really is open. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm just going to leave the local port for this computer to be port 444. And if I had a firewall, or if I would just make sure that all traffic coming over the internet could come back through port 44, back 444 to this laptop. Okay, so now with all this set, now all I have to do is type the word exploit. Okay, so at this point, this is where clapping should happen, and like cheering and stuff, because at this point, I've now connected to this computer. So what kind of stuff can we do? We can actually do some really interesting things. So first of all, we can see, well, if I type the help command, it'll show us all the different commands that we can perform on this victim's computer, the kind of stuff that we can do. So let me just show you some of the things we can do. So sysinfo, what kind of computer is this? It says it's Windows, and it's 64-bit, it's Windows 10. I can say get user ID. What kind of a user am I? So this is the username, and it doesn't tell me that I have administrative privileges, so we're going to elevate the privileges. And to do that, I'm going to type the command get system. And now it says got system. So now if I type get user ID, now it says that I am NT authority system. And this is where you should clap again and cheer again, because now you are the root administrator for this box. You can do anything to this box. You are the system administrator. That's what that means. Or in Linux or in Unix worlds, this means you are root. You can do anything on the system. And this is kind of the goal when you hack a system, is to get to root, because it means you can get any information off that box you want to. You can do anything to it. So, like, what kinds of things? Well, here's something. Let's I'm going to all right, fine. Here's something. Run post Windows. So this is a post module. So this is after exploitation. And this will kill all antivirus on that remote system. So it says no target processes were found, which means there wasn't any antivirus running on that machine. But if there was, it'd be dead now. So it wouldn't detect anything that's going to happen next. Here's something. Execute, or I'll type the command shell. Does that look familiar? So this is where I am on this system. So Tony Vance is a user. Anyways, I can navigate this whole file system, and I can download stuff, I can upload stuff, and if I type exit, I go back to my interpreter, where I can do more things. Here's something else. So I'm going to type the keyword background, and this will get me back to Metasploit, and I still have my connection. It's just put in the background, this session 1. But now I'm going to use a different exploit, and the exploit I'm going to use is, well, I'm going to set the payload to something else. And let's see. And this is set to view only. I'm going to change that to false. Show options. Okay, so I'm going to type the exploit command. Now it's giving me this. So this is the Windows desktop. It's graphical, and it looks kind of like chopped up here, but make it bigger. It's not playing well, but man, it's like really laggy. But this is the Windows desktop, and I can manipulate it. Like select text, and it's just being really... It's not making for a great demo right now, but under good conditions, you can just control the mouse using this interface. So the problem is that if you take this approach, you are moving the mouse, and the user can see that someone else is controlling their mouse, which freaks users out and tips them off that someone's using their computer, which is not a good thing. So usually, attackers won't do that. Instead, they will prefer to just run commands in the background that people aren't aware of. But if you wanted to, you could use the graphical user interface. It's just that you can do anything that you can using the mouse, using the command line. So it's better just to do something undetected using the command line. Yeah, this is not working for me, so let's move on. But you can try this in your lab. Let's see, what else should I show you? All right, so this command, this is, let me show this to you. Hang on, this one command is not in my notes. Hang on a second. Here we go. So I'll have to go back to Meterpreter, and I'll use sessions, this command sessions.-i and 1. That's the session that I have. I can have connections to dozens of different boxes, and I can put them all in the background. I can just remotely connect to them when I'm ready. I just keep these, I maintain these connections so that I can go back to those systems whenever I want to. In this case, I'm back in the system. I'm back at Meterpreter. You can see that right there. Meterpreter, what that means is that I have this, this kind of like this command station set up on top of that operating system. And it could be a Windows system, it could be a Linux system, Unix. I'll still have a Meterpreter. And it's kind of nice because I can abstract away the details of the system and run the same commands. And the command I want to run is called gather hash dump in this case. So what this will do is it'll find all the password hashes on the system, and it will give it to me. And in this case, these are NTLM hashes. And NTLM, for I don't know why, but Windows has never salted these. Still not in Windows 10. So I'm going to grab this NTLM hash over here, and now I can go to any cracking website, like Hash Killer, and I'll go to their NTLM cracker. I'll paste in my NTLM hash, and Hashcat would be faster if I had thousands of hashes to crack, but for just one hash, this is pretty fast. And there it is. So the password for this user's account is monkey. So, haha. But this is super powerful. And some people have observed that so much of hacking is to break into the system initially so that you can harvest hashes and then crack them. And then from then on, it's just cracking passwords and logging into systems using like legitimate usernames and passwords. All right, so you can do a lot of some pretty powerful stuff. And you can also do some pretty silly stuff. You can play like YouTube videos on your target. You can make it so they can't use their computer, like disable the mouse, disable the keyboard. It's really nice when you use those in combination. You can disable the keyboard and mouse and then start playing an obnoxious YouTube video and they can't turn it off. I mean, you wouldn't do that unless you're the kind of hacker that was just wanting to be a punk. You weren't there to steal stuff, you're just there to, or maybe you already stole what you wanted to steal and then you wanted to be a punk. So that does happen too. But you can also do some pretty, yeah, some pretty powerful and kind of scary stuff. Like, let me show you. What is this? Sorry, my notes are kind of incomplete, I guess, for some reason. But if I type the help command, it'll show me all kinds of different things I can do, like record the mic, record from the webcam, take pictures from the webcam, take pictures of the screenshot, and this one. So again, you don't want to do this unless you have authorization to. In this case, I control this Windows box, I own it. But this is technically violating wiretapping laws. I've just started up a keylogger, and let me start typing some stuff. So notice I haven't even saved this to the disk. This is just in memory. I'm just typing this. And over on this side, I've started this keystroke logger, and now I can enter this command. And that's what I typed right into memory. I never saved this to the disk. It's just in memory. And if I wanted to, I could dump all the contents of memory to see what other secrets are there, like keys or stuff like that. So anyway, some super powerful stuff. Let's see, what else? So I do have some more stuff, but do you have questions about like what is happening here, or what questions about different techniques or different attacks I've been using. It's kind of a scenario where you just let your imagination run wild after you have root or admin access, because once that happens, well, the saying is you own the laptop, you own the computer, because you have full control. And once that happens, it's not really the user's computer anymore, it's yours. So, questions? Yeah. If the computer's off?
Yeah, like basically what you were doing.
No. So you'd have to have your computer, it has to be on, and it has to be connected to the network. And more than that, this software right here, the only reason why I was able to get a connection in the first place is because this was running. And if I kill this, I lose my connection. So in fact, let me do that. So now I've just ended the server, the connection there, and now are there two instances of this running? Oh, now it says closed because that application closed. So now I can't even log back in because that software that was running is no longer running. So that's this is on the one hand, it's really exciting to get access to a system, but attackers understand that that is really impermanent. It could end at any moment if the user turns off the computer or just shuts down that application. Sometimes, like I showed you those Chrome exploits, as soon as a user closes the Chrome browser, then that ends the hacker's connection to that box. So what a hacker wants to do right away is to migrate from the software they're exploiting to something else. So let me actually show you that. So let me go back. I was using that, that VNC exploit where I could graphically use the mouse, or at least usually you can. So let me change it back to Meterpreter. Set the payload back to that again. So set payload Windows Interpreter reverse. Okay, and before I run exploit, I'm going to go back and start up that software again. What's kind of interesting, I guess a point that you should observe here is that it doesn't matter that Windows is fully up to date. It doesn't matter this is Windows 10 and I updated it last night, which I did. It doesn't matter because this software that's running on top of Windows is vulnerable. So that's, I mean, that should drive home the point that you want to update all of your software. Do you have a comment, Robin?
If you ran this as a user, as your user, you just access whatever that is.
No. So I wouldn't be able to type get system and then immediately become system. Like, you used to be able to do that before Windows 10 and Windows 7, but now you can't automatically do that. So what you'd have to do, you'd still gain access. You could do anything that the user could do, but you couldn't like dump the passwords and stuff like that. So what you would need next is an exploit to elevate the privileges from a regular user to the administrator. And there are lots of exploits that let you do that, lots of techniques. But it's like, it's almost like, what is the analogy I want to use here? Well, the term they use is a multi-stage attack or a multi-phase attack, where you have multiple exploits and you chain them together. Like even that Chrome news story, they were chaining together a Chrome exploit plus a Windows exploit, and that's what got them access. In this case, you'd have to chain together this exploit plus an elevated privileges exploit. All right, so exploit this. Now I'm back into the system. So let me show you the scenario. So I already showed you that once this application closes, my connection is terminated. So what I want to do is gain permanence. And the thing I want to do here is I want to find out what running processes are there. If I type the ps command, these are all the programs that are running on Windows right now, and these are the the process IDs, these numbers right here. Sorry, this is a lot. So let me just search for one. So process ID, IceCast. So here it is, process ID 9756. So again, as soon as this process dies, my connection is terminated. So I want to search for something else. And like just to show you, if I type get process ID, it shows me that I'm running off of the same process ID that IceCast is. So I'm piggybacking right off of that software. So what we'll do instead, I'm going to run a different post module. And what this will do is it'll launch a hidden notepad app that the user can't see. And now if I type get process ID, now I'm on a different process ID. And now if I go back to Windows and I turn this off and exit, I'm still in the system. So that's pretty cool. So what attackers do, and maybe I shouldn't say hacker, but let's just say attacker. And let's say that could be a white hat attacker, someone who's has authorization to do this, to test their system's security, or maybe it's an authorized attacker. But either way, you want to get permanence. And the first thing to do is to migrate into a stable process. And again, here I am in Windows. There is no, like this is the thing I opened up to type my, my journal entry, but there's a hidden notepad process which I can't even see. And that's what Metasploit is using. Now I can make this even more permanent, and I can upload a remote access tool, or an RAT, a RAT. And what that does, it basically opens up a port that'll allow me to connect back to that computer whenever I want to. And that will survive a reboot. So if the user were to turn off the computer, it doesn't matter what process I've migrated to, all the processes will end. But if I install a backdoor tool, then as soon as that computer is booted back up, the remote access tool will open up that port, and I'll be able to connect back to it. So in the case of Equifax, as soon as they breach that server, the claim dispute server I told you about, they set up multiple RATs throughout the system and other systems, so that even if they patched Apache struts, which they didn't do for a long time, they would still be able to get in through some of their many backdoors. Does that make sense? It's a good question. Other questions? Yeah, Sam.
What kind of, I guess, digital experiments would be involved? Like, if I would use guide algorithm.
Well, if you're like this kind of user where this is your world, then no. Like not unless the hacker becomes really annoying and like disables your ability to interact with the system or starts playing music. Like with a Sony hack, which is one of the worst hacks there was. They wiped the drives and started playing AC/DC Thunderstruck, like on all of the machines. And like then, yeah, people knew that those machines were compromised. But until they did that, no one knew. But if you have other tools like, well, if I have host-based detection systems that are like constantly looking at the hard drive or looking at memory to look for suspicious activity, then yeah, those things could notice these things. Yeah, Sam.
If you ran like an app that could put antivirus tools,
Well, yes and no. So let me just check the time. Sometimes. So if you use off-the-shelf exploits, like straight from the Metasploit library, then it might detect that. Because Metasploit is open source, all those libraries are known. So antivirus tools should be aware of them being there. In fact, I turned off Windows Defender, and Windows Defender will detect Meterpreter, and it will start raising errors to the user and stuff. So I didn't want that to happen during this demo, just to keep things simple. But what you can do, and this is actually pretty cool, and like Metasploit has always had this, but the latest version of Metasploit has even more powerful tools to hide your malware, to obfuscate it. And what that does is it takes a known piece of malware and makes it look different so that antivirus tools don't pick it up. They don't notice it. So the answer is yes, for certain tools that are standard, that have not been changed in any way, then some tools will detect that. But you can make it so that it's a lot stealthier and that those pieces of malware won't be detected. But that's kind of another level. So you can definitely do that. You can read about it. But for this lab, we're just going to use the plain vanilla Metasploit tools. Other questions? Can you see yourself doing this next week? Because next week, I'm going to give you a Linux server and an IP address, and you're going to start using tools like Nmap and Nessus to start identifying open ports, to identify services that are running, and then to try to figure out if those services are vulnerable. And then, if they are, to find an exploit inside Metasploit to give you access. That's kind of how it works. And then once you do get access, then you want to get permanence, like maybe change users' passwords, or even better, find out what their actual passwords are and log in as those users. So on Monday, what I'll do is I'll have a walkthrough for not the midterm server, but I'll just give you an example of compromising a server, just a different server, just to show you some of the steps you could go through. And maybe that'll help you get a better idea. So questions about this? This is one of the leading hacking tools, Metasploit. And organizations around the world use this. If you want to get into security, either on the defensive side or offensive side, and you say, I've used Metasploit, I can do these things, that's impressive to employers, and they know that you're interested in security and you can actually do some stuff. You know enough, definitely enough to be dangerous. So again, don't do these things I'm teaching in this lab unless you own the computer or you have authorization to do this. Don't do this at your job. Don't do this to your roommate's computer. Don't do it to Temple computers unless you have written authorization. And in your case, for this class, you have written authorization. It's right in the syllabus. But it can be pretty fun. In fact, it's way more fun to do it than to demo it. And especially if you don't really know what's happening, it's just not as interesting or cool. But this is actually one of the funnest parts of security, is doing this kind of stuff. Not the only fun thing, but just one of the many fun things. Let's see. Other questions? Yeah, Robin.
How does it work if you like fire the consultant? I mean, they have to kind of do the separate system, right? You can't just run the.
Well, so Robin's asking, if you're a consultant, will a company give you a separate system? And sometimes they do. So sometimes they'll say, okay, I'm standing up a box which is similar to our actual payment system or our actual e-commerce system, and I want you to compromise that system. But many times, they have you actually compromise the actual production systems. And there's many different kinds of engagements. So next week we have your midterm, but 2 weeks from today, we have a guest from EY. And his job is to run penetration engagements across EY's practices. I don't think it's national, but maybe it is national, I don't know. But over many, many different groups where they go to clients and they offer these exact services. But in each case, no matter what kind of engagement it is, you get a scope of work, and you have it just written out exactly what to do. Like, these are the systems we're allowed to touch for these time frames, and these are the types of attacks we're going to use. And the reason why that's agreed upon is because hacking can break systems. So if their payment system goes down, it's not on you as the penetration tester, as the evaluator. They just know it comes with the territory. And again, the PCI, the payment credit card industry standard, requires companies to do this on an annual basis. Other questions? So you might think, well, if I were to join the military, would I use tools like Metasploit? And the answer is yes. Metasploit is not the only game in town. In fact, they have a pro version, which costs $5 grand. And then you have access to different modules and more advanced features. It's kind of like a freemium model, but it's still Metasploit. It's still super powerful. There's other tools like Core Impact, which is conceptually similar, but it's a different product. But again, this is the most popular tool out there. And I talked about purchasing 0 days. So what you can do is you can go to ExploitDB. You can pay 20 bucks, let's say, to elevate privileges from a regular user to an advanced user. And you can purchase that exploit and drop it right into Metasploit, into your own custom folder for your own exploits. Or you could develop your own. And so that happens too. Okay, so maybe there's just a couple minutes. So maybe I'll just end here, and I'll stay here for questions. But this is, I'm excited for what you will do next week. And again, on Monday, I'll go through this demo, and I'll send out instructions for connecting to the VPN so that you can be sure that on Monday you're good to go. All right, so I'll see you on Monday.